Hey everybody, so today we're going to be playing some single race pots. This is Beyond Range, and let's get into it. Now we're playing defense from the big blind versus the other players. So first of all, we're facing a large bet, and our hand is not indifferent. I'll kind of try to go through hands quickly because I do like to go in depth and break down why things are happening, but I've watched a few videos that I made and then I didn't post them because I just thought that they were way too long. Here we're able to sort of deny some equity from our opponent and take EV away from a variety of hands that he could have. Our range actually does quite well here, but then our hand is just going to be mixed basically between bet and check. But um, yeah, I didn't realize how inefficient it was to bet because I actually thought that my assumption was that this hand would be betting a little bit more. So I just want to take a look at the overall strategy on the turn because I know there's a decent amount of like even 7x that ends up having a wow. Wow. Wow, so let's take a look at what our. See, I want to click hands. I will just probably click a bunch of hands, but the thing is, when something goes against your assumption, you need to kind of look at why. And my assumption was that on the turn, we would have our range lead at a decent frequency. Now, because basically what's happening is he's betting very large as UTG. This guy that's like 18% RFI. We have like what 40% of hands here as the big blind. Like we're very wide. We're getting very good pot odds pre. We're ending the action and he's going to be pushing his advantage. He bets big. He's betting with a lot of hands. This seven is extremely powerful for the big blind because our opponent has a really strong range here. Even though the big blind does have a lot of future nuts that are kind of be going to be hard to deal with on turns and rivers, and he can exercise a lot of racing and forcing money in early versus bets. It's still a spot where big blind wants, or sorry, UTG wants to force money in against the big blind because of how strong the overpairs and the ace jacks and this kind of stuff are. Now let's go back to the flop strategy as well and make sure that kind of my assumptions about this are roughly on point. So actually, I assume that the flop strategy would be slightly more aggressive here, and yeah, my assumption is slightly different. I'm going to change this card to just sort of remove some of the possible nutted hands that are happening for the big blind. I know this, you can't really duplicate it because the big blind has a lot of 6x and less 4x, and then that means he'll have less equity. There's many different noisy things going on, but okay. Um, yeah, this is kind of different. Anyways, we'll move on. I just kind of had some questions here. At this point on the river, so our opponent declines to bet. We are going to basically be putting in probably too much money if we bet all of our jack X on the river, because basically you're not just getting to the river and saying, "Oh, I have a jack," but you're thinking about the strategies from the flop to the turn to the river. If you think, let's say, if you're UTG here and you're sitting with aces or kings or queens, and you know, hey, my opponent's always going to put in a bunch of money on the river whenever he has a jack, and like, hey, dude, like a lot of your range is a jack and a seven and a six here, well, then you as UTG might not actually start betting the turn because what's going to happen is now you're going to bet these for quote unquote value, but your opponent's going to bluff raise you and he's going to raise you thin with a seven. And, like a lot of 7x. He might even raise all of his 7x because maybe he just thinks, oh, I'm just going to get thin value here. I'm not going to slow play because my opponent wouldn't. I don't need to defend against bluffs or thin value bets anyways in the double barrel line because he's not going to triple thin. And maybe you're not. Maybe he's going to bluff or not. But whatever. I'll just use my catchers to deal with that. So then he's basically UTG will have to defend against the 7x, and that's very bad. So if he is able to check back his overpairs because the big blind is just putting in too much money with the jack, well, that's really good for him. So you want to really think like, who is like doing well here? What are the advantages? And it's not like a spot where you want to be putting in much. And then on the river, your opponent's basically saying like, hey, I have like a hand that's worth this much money. Well, a jack is not worth that much money, so our hand is a bluff catcher. So then you think, well, what are the most efficient hands to actually bluff catch? Okay, well, yeah, like, do we have any 5x in our range? Is he going to be, like, playing like this with pocket jacks? Is he going to be overbetting the river with, like, pocket fives? Is he, like, what's a hand that actually makes sense here for value, right? Like, Maybe if he had pocket jacks, he would go smaller on the river. So maybe he doesn't have pocket jacks. So maybe with our bluff raises, we don't want to like, use the jack, or maybe it's not the most efficient thing. But you think about like these kind of things. It's you think about your eight. Okay, well maybe you don't want to have a 10 in your range because a 10 blocks king 10, queen 10, ace 10 that might be bluffing you. So like bluff catching with a 10 is bad. Oh, that means maybe an 8 is better, and a lot of my jack X are going to be exactly jack 10, queen jack, having a Broadway. Maybe that's not as good. Or maybe you think, having king jack is better because then you block more of his pocket kings, or like whatever the case is, but you have logic and you're trying to understand like how it's organized or how to organize it. Now you don't have that many nuts, and a lot of your nuts are going to be betting the river. So you basically have a few nutted combinations on this river that are going to try to like defend and ambush him if he does start going too thin. It's kind of like he's going to overextend himself, and then you're going to ambush his overextension by slow playing on the river. That's kind of what's happening. So you think about like, do you want to call this or not? Well, then what's your most efficient jack X? And is he going to start doing something where he's just going huge with ace jack and king jack, and then maybe it's better for you to actually bluff catch ace jack king jack instead of weak jack 8. You think about these kind of things, and they kind of start to make a lot of sense. Now, actually, I didn't think that we were going to be folding this combination so often at all. I thought that based on what I said, I thought that it would be one of the more efficient jack X to be calling, and apparently we just need to fold a lot because it seems like the range that he's representing is mostly going to be pocket aces, kings, and queens. That's kind of what this sizing is doing here. So then when we're having a hand like even a6 or a7, or not a7, of course a7, but if we have a hand like a6 or king 6 or queen 6, apparently just blocking those kind of overpairs, which is mostly what he's representing, is much more efficient than even calling a jack, even calling jack 8. I thought that kind of having the 8 here, yeah, it does block king 8 and ace 8 bluffs and some stuff, but a lot of his 8x would just like 10 8 and 9 8 would have been betting the turn. And I thought that it just made more sense basically for the 8, but apparently I'm wrong. And now we start to look at the minimum values, kind of this, and then you can see how he's using some of the bigger bluffs. Yeah, he's taking some of the 8x, the 9-8 that didn't get here, the 7-8. So you can see actually we're blocking a lot of bluffs with this. Now I didn't realize that. Great. So now we've learned something. We're going to move on to the next one. And that's kind of a big deal that I'm messing this up, right? That's not a small thing because you are being polarized against, and then you need to think about what's most efficient. And I made kind of like, it's not a big picture error. There's many different layers in poker understanding, but I didn't really realize what was being prioritized in terms of the blockers, and maybe I'm just not playing very well big blind versus UTG single raise pot. It doesn't mean you need to do anything extreme, but you just kind of note it down in your head and think, oh, maybe I'm like making some mistakes here. Here he's got like a strong equity advantage. He's doing a lot of betting. This hand just gets in the call range. It's extremely efficient. Not good to be going with the raise. Turn again, like we're basically calling. He's saying he has nuts and medium hands that he's betting. We're basically going to be raising a lot of our nuts on the flop. That means that our range is more condensed. We're getting on a turn. Our opponent has many strong hands on this turn. Now on the turn, our opponent is electing to go with the overbet. Now, what are we trying to do? We're trying to capture the most EV we can with our range. Now, how do you do that? Well, maybe what you do is you try to disincentivize your opponent from turning anything into a bluff and capturing a ton of EV from you, or you want to disincentivize him from just going super thin from value and just capturing a bunch of EV. It's not like so black and white, but let's say you're playing rock paper scissors. If you're always going 50% with rock or 50% with scissors, well, you give your opponent a very clear counter strategy, right? So you want to understand what are you doing to your opponent based on how you're continuing. Now, at equilibrium, this hand right here, let's say some people might use a heuristic. When you're learning poker, you might say, oh, pair plus gut shot, that's good to continue. Well, that's not really what's happening here, because basically your opponent is making your range indifferent with this kind of bet sizing, meaning that you are trying to not give his best hands too much EV by overcalling and not give his bluffs too much EV by not over bluffing or not over folding, right? Which are his bluffs. You don't want to overfold against his bluffs. So you want to call roughly a range that makes those bluffs about the same as check. Now, if you always continue all gut shots, all flush draws, all pair plus gut shots, all flush draws, all your nuts, all your good hands, and maybe you start like folding king 8 and king 7 and king 6, that are weak, yeah, you still might be overcalling because actually he's risking a lot here. He's betting 130% pot. So you need to fold like 57% of the time. Let's take a look at like actually how much we're folding here and then how we're kind of defending with different parts. Yeah, actually it's 58. It's not 57, but it's basically you're getting the general idea. You're seeing that something like Jack 10, Queen 10 is starting to fold a lot. You're starting to see that actually there's a portion of something like King 6 that's calling as well, King 7 that's calling as well, King 8 that's calling as well. You might ask, well, why do you split these kind of hands? Well, what you might find is that if you always call something like King 6 on the turn, but you never call Jack 10, well, on the river that ends up being the Queen or the 10 or the Jack, etc. Let's say the Queen or the Jack or the 10 where you end up improving on these cards. Well, your opponent maybe with some strong hands, he might know, oh, he never improves, I can value bet thinner. Or maybe, because of that fact, he's going to have incentive to either put more money in or put less money in depending on how he thinks you organize your range. And then you'll find that really you're mostly mixing with these different parts of your range. They become indifferent bluff catchers. I didn't really realize that King 8 or King 7 or King 6 was more valuable than King 5 or King 4 or King 2. I don't really understand why that's the case. I wonder what minimum value is for in position because it's just a bit odd to me. I don't understand why these things are the case, but yeah, sometimes I'm just going to be ignorant. But yeah, we can see how, being able to basically re-improve and hit straights and be able to re-improve is pretty valuable. But also if you're continuing these too often. So the point is that you're with a hand here and your hand is indifferent. So you want to think about what do you want to do against your indifferent hand? Well, you might sit here and you might be playing a passive opponent and you're like, oh, this guy's a nit, my hand is indifferent, I'm going to fold. Or you might say, oh, this guy's the aggressive guy and he's basically always just trying to bluff, well, I'm going to call. Right, that's kind of a decent way to go about thinking in these terms. Now, on the river, our opponent goes all in. Again, what we're doing is we have a bunch of weak hands, right? We have our opponent is the one with the large advantage in terms of the nuts. Let's take a look at the equity graph quickly. So we can we don't need to look at this river. We get to just the starting part of the river and we take a look at the equity graph. Now, what you're seeing is that, the green here is the cutoff. And you just want to see that the cutoff gets here with, let's say, 82% of hands that are the nuts. 18% of hands that are the nuts. I apologize, but his 100 to 82nd percentile hand is the nuts. That's a really, really important fact about this situation, right? And it's very important to also see that we have some slow plays, we have some nuts, so we're having like 92%. And part of that is to be able to deal with the fact that our opponent also has a lot of hands like pocket aces. He also has a lot of hands like pocket kings, pocket tens, etc. Even he'll have some turn hands like pocket nines. So one of the ways that we end up being able to show down the weaker portions of our range is just by slow playing. And then if our opponent value bets too big and too thin, then he kind of starts owning himself. And that's a defensive way that we can end up getting here with this, playing defensively. Now this sizing, again, because we have these nuts in our range, we actually don't think that our opponent is going to have very much incentive to use this sizing with many hands in his range that are so weak, because if he starts doing this with too weak of a range in this situation, then we end up being able to just slow play more, and then he kind of just owns himself, right? A lot of our turn raises are because we think, oh, we will have too many nuts if we call, then he won't put in that much money, he won't go thin. we need to immediately put money in and get the advantage, put money in with the advantage now because our opponent won't do it for us. If our opponent's doing it for us later, then actually just kind of slow playing the turn is good. We see our opponents using the all-in sizing with stuff like Queen Jack, even with stuff like pocket tens, pocket kings, pocket aces, and yeah, you can see that he's not always doing it. We can take a look at the basically him going for thin value here will depend on how many slow plays he thinks we have, and also he might change it depending on how many bluffs he thinks we have as well. But yeah, and then we get to this situation, and a lot of our range, once we end up actually calling the turnover bet, you'll see that our get to river range actually is kind of a lot of nuts, right? We end up having 8% straights, we end up having a decent amount of sets. Now, what are our sets? Now, when we have a set, we're kind of blocking their set value betting region. So pocket tens is always going to be a call, right? And our opponent could be value betting it all in with a touch of nines, but then it kind of is not the greatest thing for him because a lot of the hands that we might be calling are going to be nines as well. He might want to use the smaller sizing and force more pressure onto the weaker parts of our range, but apparently he doesn't even really have very many nines to get to this spot because I guess nines are... So nines are just not betting flop very often at all, apparently. And that makes a lot of sense, actually. But I just thought this texture was a little bit stronger for him. Like, I thought he would actually be putting more money in on this texture and betting more. But okay, I misunderstood the situation. So that makes sense. Yeah, and basically, yeah, you can learn a lot by going through these spots, and then you're kind of facing an all in, and then you're thinking, well, you are calling with a lot of these good hands. What are you trying to accomplish against this all in sizing? What are you trying to do? Right now, if you remember, your turn calling range is a ton of pair plus gut shots and hands like king six, right? Now, a lot of your range is also, like we said, we have almost 10% straights. Our opponent is risking roughly 3x pot, not quite. So you see also some of his hands on the river, a lot of his bluffs on the turn would have been an ace. Some of his bluffs are also going to have some amount of showdown value, you could say, when he gets to the river. Some of his, hands are not, total air, but also he gets to value bet, maybe not insanely thinly. He does have a lot of hands, but you need to think about what part of his range you're making indifferent when you're bluff catching. In this case, I think he has probably enough bluffs to not have to turn so much random crap into bluff. Now we're taking a long time on this hand. I apologize. We'll finish this once it's done, but yeah, he does have just a lot of like Jack 7, Queen 6. So yeah, we actually don't need to like overfold. We need to really just make this particular bluff roughly zero, maybe a little bit more. But and the thing is, we're not just making this bluff zero, but the thing is, when we hold one of these hands, we're actually unblocking his bluffs, and it's more likely that when he holds these bluffs, we actually have a hand that's going to call, and then we need to make his hand actually indifferent to bluffing or not. So we still need to fold quite a bit. But yeah, you can see that essentially the hands of indifference, like holding a hand like ace 10, that's blocking, the pocket aces and the pocket tens, is pretty good. But also you can see that a hand like Jack 10 might be calling as well. And these are some of the smaller details, but you can think about these things in terms of consequence. These are very micro details, so you never want to get caught up in them. It's kind of like missing the forest for the trees, but then eventually you do want to look at the trees, and you do want to analyze what the actual trees are doing, because it will also give you more information about how the forest is structured and why things are happening. And you can think about it in the sense that if you're always calling the blockers against these kind of sets, and you're always calling the two pairs, but then you're never calling the blockers against the straights, then your opponent starts having incentive to really just go all in with his straights, and even use different sizings on turn and river where he doesn't want to mix it, but you're just putting in too much money. When you're unblocking his nuts, he'll basically have incentive to lead you down this part of the game tree and overcall. You're not just looking at the isolated incident of, oh no, I'm facing this or that on the river, but you have to think about the incentives that you're giving him across all nodes of the game tree if you're calling the wrong blockers or you're calling the right ones. But again, it's not like you're going to memorize this. You're not trying to take anything away. You're just trying to understand structure. Yeah, you don't have to know it. You just have to get the general idea, the big picture idea, which is sort of the point. So, anyways, we've kind of exhausted this particular episode. And River apparently we're calling more than half the time. I thought we were folding quite a bit here, but um, yeah, we could actually look at this again and then kind of, you can go into more micro details basically. You could end it, you could go into more micro details, but then you could see um, which Jack 10 are specifically trying to go with the bluff catch, and then which Jack 10 are not really wanting to go with the bluff catch. Let's take a look. Okay, I just took a minute to just pause and think about why these different hearts are occurring. So basically, there's more incentive for our opponent to be betting the queen jack with the jack of hearts on the flop. And then also with the jack of spades, these are going to be the queen jack that end up getting to this line that are prioritized. So these blockers are better because they essentially block more of his get to river value. So I didn't even think that deeply. I kind of just looked at Jack 10. But yeah, that's kind of what's going on, is that his overall get to river straights are going to contain more of the queen jack with the jack of hearts, more of the queen jack with the jack of spades, and then we want to be calling these ones because it's more likely to remove it. But this is a micro detail I wouldn't even catch in game because my brain is just doing a lot of other things, and maybe I don't prioritize the most efficient things, or maybe I do and it's just hard to take all the pieces of information in the puzzle together. It's hard to think about all these things. So this is a fun session. Anyways, guys, I love you all. I will see you next time, and goodbye for now.